Welcome to the Live Unrestricted podcast, a show where you'll learn how to heal your relationship with food and your body so that you can focus your time and energy on more important things like your personal growth. I'm your host, Sabrina Magna, food freedom coach, and my mission is to help make your life happier and healthier without stress, overwhelm, or guilt about food. If you love the show, please do go out and share it. And if you're looking for support with your relationship with food, details about my programs are in the show notes. Thanks for spending time with me today. Now let's jump in. So I'm going to take a wild guess and say that if you're like one of the vast majority of dieters that I've worked with, your various weight loss attempts did not go exactly to plan. The first diet may have been when you were young, when you were maybe 12, 13. Maybe you grew up in a family that made you feel like you needed to fix your body, that made you feel like your body was not right, like you were overweight, like you needed to right away start restricting and controlling the food that you were eating. Maybe your parents were on Weight Watchers, and if you're really unlucky, they made you do it with them. Maybe your first diet started in college, university, when you started seeing your body change because you were going out more, you were on your own, all of that diet talk about the freshman 15 and how to avoid it. Maybe your first diet happened when you had kids and you wanted to get that baby weight off. You perhaps felt uncomfortable in your body, and that's when you started restricting your food intake, going on meal plans, whatever it was at the time. But whatever and whenever it started for you, it may feel like it's been a major struggle for you ever since. It may feel like your entire life has had to revolve around food and your weight and dieting. No matter what you're doing, who you're with, way too much of your energy is spent thinking about food. You're always thinking about what you should or shouldn't eat, when you're allowed to eat, or thinking about what you really want to eat but won't let yourself have. But this kind of obsession over food has always led to the same pattern. You do really well and you stay quote unquote on plan for a few weeks or even a few months. However, with every new diet attempt, perhaps the time that you're able to stay good or on plan gets shorter and shorter. Each diet attempt gets harder to maintain. And despite that, despite the constant pattern of gaining and losing the weight, being on plan and then completely going off the rails, despite all of the emotional turmoil that you've felt through that initial rush of losing the weight and thinking, oh my God, this is finally going to work for me. And then that disappointment and that feeling of failure that you feel when you're no longer able to stick to it and you blame yourself and you gain the weight back and you have to start over again. Despite all of that, you look back on those diets with rose-colored glasses on and you think of those things that have quote unquote worked, right? You may have think, well, Weight Watchers worked for me. Intermittent fasting worked for me. Convincing yourself that working meant losing the weight and that it was a lack of willpower, motivation, or discipline that led to you falling off the wagon. And you might still feel like there is just another diet out there that might work for you, right? That magical diet that's going to be that missing piece, that key that's going to unlock this whole new life for you, but you just haven't found it yet. Or maybe if you've been listening to this podcast or started learning about intuitive eating, you might be intrigued by the idea of intuitive eating, but you want to come back to it after you've lost the weight first. I've talked to so many women who like the idea of intuitive eating. It resonates with them. It makes so much sense, but they think, well, I need to lose the weight first. Or we think when we go on a diet, I'll go on this diet. I know that it's not sustainable. I know I can't live this way for the rest of my life, but I'll lose the weight. And then once I hit my goal weight, then I'll just eat normally. I'll be able to start eating foods without guilt. It's this if-then fallacy. If I lose weight, then everything will be easier. And if that's you, if you've had this idea that, you know what, eventually I'm just going to break this pattern, it's going to be that one diet that's going to break this pattern, then this episode is for you. Because today we are talking about how to break free from the diet cycle. So what I'm going to do in this episode is I'm going to describe in detail what the diet cycle is so that you can start recognizing certain patterns in your life. Because as I always say to my clients, the first step to change is awareness. I'll explain what triggers this cycle and how we get trapped in it. And finally, I'll break down how you can finally break free from this cycle so that you can start truly living your life without constantly thinking about food, worrying about the next diet that you're going to try, frustrated about always being on and off the wagon, and most importantly, so that you can stop putting your health at risk, because we know from research that chronic dieters who are stuck in that cycle of losing and gaining and losing the same weight over and over again not only suffer from side effects like increased binges, cravings, and psychological effects like depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, feelings of failure, but they also have an increased risk of health diseases. A 32-year study of more than 3,000 men and women in the Framingham Heart Study has shown that regardless of the initial weight, people whose weight repeatedly goes up and down, which is known as weight cycling or yo-yo dieting, have a higher overall death rate and twice the normal risk of dying of heart diseases. So that means that the harm from yo-yo dieting might be equal to the risk of staying obese. In a separate study by Harvard Alumni Health Study showed that people who lose and gain at least 11 pounds within a decade or so don't live as long as those who maintain a stable weight. And the reason why it's important to understand this is because when we talk about intuitive eating, when we talk about putting a stop to dieting, a lot of people think, okay, yes, this might make me feel at peace with food. It might make me feel better mentally, but they think that I need to keep dieting because this is about my health. I'm scared of developing heart disease, high cholesterol, diabetes, but what we've seen from research is that intuitive eating not only makes you better off psychologically, but it's better for your health as well. And so breaking free from this constant cycle is the key to taking care of your health for the long term. So before talking about the diet cycle, I think it's important to note and remember that it's okay if you still want to lose weight. And I talked about this on a previous episode, but there's this common misconception about intuitive eating is that you just can't want to lose weight. And this is untrue, and it doesn't take into account the fact that there is so much pressure on people, especially people in bigger bodies. There is so much fat phobia and weight stigma in our society. There's this pressure to be thinner, and it can almost feel like if you are in a bigger body, regardless of if you're healthy or not, you should want to lose weight. You should have to lose weight. And intuitive eating exists to provide you with an option to not spend your entire life trapped in this diet cycle. It gives you a set of tools to turn to if you want to take care of your body without trying to shrink its size. And when you understand how you can get trapped in this endless yo-yo dieting cycle, it's going to be a lot easier for you to look back on this long string of quote unquote failed diet attempts with compassion, with understanding, with curiosity even, rather than shame and feelings of failure. So when you learn how to break free from this diet cycle, you're going to be able to get to a place where your eating is consistent, it is balanced, it is free from this constant yo-yoing from one extreme to another, from restricting to binging. It's going to help you stop feeling like your entire life is constantly either on or off the wagon. And you can get to a place where eating feels easy, it feels natural, and it feels peaceful and relaxed instead of chaotic and overwhelming. So what is the diet cycle exactly? The diet cycle is a trap. It's a pattern that many people, chronic dieters, get caught up in when they're trying to lose weight that keeps them stuck in a cycle of chaotic eating, food obsession, and weight cycling. Weight cycling meaning gaining and losing the same weight time and time again. It's the experience of cycling through periods of restrained eating. So that means through dieting or food restrictions of some sort, followed by periods of disconnected eating and feeling out of control around food. The diet cycle is almost always accompanied by feelings of guilt, like I shouldn't have eaten this food, I shouldn't have eaten those chips, I shouldn't have eaten that cake, and shame, right? Like I can never stick to a diet. What's wrong with me? Why can't I do this? Why can everyone else do it? Leading to people feeling like a failure. And the way that I describe this cycle is in 7 stages. So I know that this is audio, but I want you to imagine a cyclic graph. So as I go through the 7 stages, I want you, if you can, even draw this out. And so number 1 is this cycle typically starts at stage 1, which is gaining control. So this is when you receive a message or you feel that something is wrong with your body. You feel or you're told that the way to fix your body is by losing weight. You might also do this as a way of getting healthier, but this is usually a disguise for the desire to lose weight. So that is what usually triggers this cycle. And we move on to stage 2, which is the one more diet stage. This is when you go on a diet or a quote unquote lifestyle change, because the diet industry has gone very smart. So it likes to change up their marketing and make you think that this is something that you're going to be able to do for the rest of your life. And at the beginning, you are full of fresh motivation, believing that this time is going to be different. Even though you have done this time and time again, you really do believe this time is going to be the time that I'm going to stick to it. And that is when you move on to stage 3, which is the restriction phase. So you start restricting, whether that is through fasting, counting calories, quote unquote clean eating, cutting out bad foods, so sweets, snacks, carbs, whatever it is. The restriction phase is when the Weight Watchers and the intermittent fasting, the keto, the Optavia, the Noom, they come in full force. And that leads to stage number 4, which is the honeymoon period. So that's when you initially start seeing results. You might be losing weight. You are feeling motivated by the number on the scale going downwards, and you're hopeful that this is finally working. In the honeymoon phase, you're not feeling the strong effects of deprivation yet because it's been a short amount of time. And you think, oh my God, I feel so good. I'm losing weight. During this stage, you might also be getting compliments which actually fuel this cycle. But during the honeymoon phase, it's when you have that elation and that hope that this time is going to be different. But that leads to stage 5, which is the turning point. After a few days or a few weeks or a few months, if this is one of your first diets, if this is one of your diets after years and years of doing this, chances are it's going to be closer to a few days. The cravings start to increase and you can't stop thinking about food. You start thinking about the things that you can't have. If you are on a low carb or a low calorie diet, you probably start having a lot more hunger. That is when your willpower also starts to decrease. So some of those quote unquote bad foods that you've been restricting or, telling yourself you can't have start creeping in, right? So this is the classic one cookie won't hurt, right? But it's never just the one cookie. And that leads us to stage 6, which is the loss of control. This is when binging, stress eating, loss of control eating happens. One cookie leads to the whole box. And because you've been feeling so deprived and you've been giving up all of these foods that you just wish that you could be eating, there's something that happens inside your mind, which is the screw it mentality. Screw it. I've already broken my rule. I've already done something quote unquote bad. And so I'm just going to eat all of the things that I have been craving and I've been depriving myself. I'm just going to do it all in one sitting and I'll get back to being good and get back on track tomorrow. During this stage, you might feel like you have no control over your eating. The best way that I can describe it is when I was going through this, when I would have a binge, it usually happened at nighttime once everyone had gone to bed because I was ashamed of the way that I ate. And I also was ashamed of the fact that I broke, because if I was doing super good and I was eating healthy in front of people, I didn't want them to see me eating unhealthy foods. I wanted them to think that I was doing awesome and that I was doing so well. And so during this stage, the best way that I can describe it is it's like an angel and devil on your shoulder. This angel who's telling you that you should stay on plan and you're doing so good and keep eating all the right foods. And then this devil, which honestly takes over in that moment. And you feel like you can't stop yourself no matter what. And sometimes this happens in secret. So we start having secretive eating habits. We hide food. And then that leads us to stage 7, which is the guilt and the shame. Right after losing control, we are lying on our couch late at night and think, what has come over me? Why can't I just stick to it? Why can't I just control myself around food? There is regret. There is feelings of failure. And over time, usually stage 7, the guilt and the shame, it can, if one cheat meal turns into a cheat day, turns into a cheat week, eventually the weight comes back on and you're back to your old habits. You feel like a failure and you blame your lack of willpower. Your confidence and your energy is lower than ever. And it's that moment when you start seeing the weight creeping back up that you kind of stop caring, right? What's the point if I'm putting in all of this effort and I am sacrificing so much and I am miserable and I'm obsessing over food and I don't feel like I can eat normally, then what's the point if I'm not even losing weight, right? I'm not even hitting my goals. I'm not even feeling better in my body. And that guilt and shame will last a week, it'll last a month, sometimes it'll last years, but eventually you come right back to stage 1, which is gaining control. I have to get back on track. Stage 1 often happens in January, right? That is where we have this light bulb moment of, God, I've been neglecting my health. I've been neglecting my weight. And so this is the year I'm gaining back control. And so we start that cycle all over again. And so to recap what those stages are, if you're writing these down, stage 1, you gain control. So you have that desire to lose weight. Stage 2, one more diet. That's when you decide this is going to be a lifestyle change. I'm going to try one more thing. Stage 3, which is the restriction phase. Stage 4, the honeymoon period. Stage 5 is the turning point, right? The cravings increase. You can't stop thinking about food until eventually, whether that's a bad day, whether it's a celebration, whether there's a party, whether it's a holiday, something breaks you, something makes you cave, which is stage 6, the loss of control. Can't stop yourself. You eat everything in sight, and stage 7 leads to the guilt and the shame, which brings you all the way back to stage 1, which is gaining control again. So a real life example of this cycle is when I was struggling with my relationship with food and with dieting. Every holiday season at the end of December, I would decide, you know what, 2 weeks of just screw it. No rules. I'm going to allow myself to eat whatever I want. And because at the time I was so disconnected from my body, I obviously did not know how to listen to my body. I didn't know how to stop when I was full because I had dieted so much that it completely disconnected me from that. I was constantly counting calories. So if I stopped counting calories, I didn't know how to eat without it. December was kind of a free-for-all. And so, of course, when January rolled around, I felt awful. I didn't feel good in my body. And stage one was I needed to gain back control. And so January for a couple of years was no sweets January. So I decided to cut back on sugar and planned to only allow myself to have sweets on special occasions. And so I got rid of all sugar in the house and I stocked up on all healthy foods and dessert alternatives. So I would make like sugar-free, cocoa-based desserts. And for a week or two, everything would go okay. I mean, I hated it. I craved everything, but it was okay. And I was able to stick to these rules. And then I would start noticing after a couple of weeks, my cravings for things like cookies or cakes and candy started to increase and they started to feel almost uncontrollable. And that's where that feeling of being addicted to sweets or sugar comes from. This is something I explained to my clients in the program, is that the feeling of sugar addiction doesn't come from the actual food itself. And we can talk about sugar addiction in a completely different episode, but it comes from the restriction, the telling yourself you can't have it, making the cravings increase. So I was trying to eat like healthier versions of the things that I was actually craving. So I don't know if you've ever experienced this before, but let's say I was craving like a brownie. So I would start with something that was sweet but healthy. So I would start with like grapes. And then grapes didn't do it for me. So I would move on to something a bit sweeter, but still quote unquote healthy enough for me to not feel guilty. So I'd have like cereal. And then that wouldn't do it. So you have like the fiber one healthy brownie. And then that wouldn't do it. And eventually you end up jumping from one food to another to a point where you're no longer hungry anymore. Your body has definitely had way too much food, but the craving for the original food is still there. It doesn't go away. So you end up having the brownie that you were craving in the first place, but on top of just having the brownie, which you could have just had from the beginning, you've had the grapes and the cereal and the fiber one brownie and the dates covered in peanut butter and the dark chocolate. And you've had so much more food than if you had just allowed yourself to have the food that you wanted in the first place and then just moved on. And so finally, you end up breaking, you have the food that you wanted, you eat it all in one sitting, and afterwards you feel guilty, you feel ashamed, and you get down on yourself and vow that you'll never eat any sugar again because you must just be addicted. So why do we get stuck in this cycle? The answer is twofold. There's two driving mechanisms that fuel this cycle: biological and psychological mechanisms. So number one, biological. Your body is trying to protect you, and your body is wired for surviving. When you restrict or limit certain types of food or cut back on the amount of food that you eat through low calorie, low carb kind of diets, your body gets used to the message that you are starving, that food is limited. So it switches into survival mode. Our body senses the scarcity. Even if the food is available, it doesn't matter if you are secure with food and you have plenty of food to feed you for weeks on end, your body doesn't know that. Your body just senses the scarcity, and it is biologically wired as it was centuries ago when food was scarce and our ancestors literally did not know when the next time food would be available. So at that time, the ability to burn fewer calories and to store extra calories was a genetic survival mechanism. It kept humans alive. But fast forward to today, to your body, any kind of dieting or restrained eating feels like deprivation and starvation. This happens even if you are not actively dieting. So I see a lot of people who are not technically on a diet, but they still have the diet mentality. They're still thinking like a dieter. So that means they're still conscious of everything that they're eating. They're still feeling bad and judging their food choices, still feeling guilty when they've eaten something that they quote unquote shouldn't have. And while you might not be traditionally dieting, your body is still getting the message that deprivation is coming. That starvation is on the horizon. So because your body is incredibly smart and it does not want you to starve or to die, or it wants you to have the proper energy to survive and to optimally thrive, it responds by increasing your appetite, decreasing your fullness signals, which leads to people overeating, increasing your cravings, especially for those energy dense, aka calorie dense foods, like those higher in sugar and in fat. So that is the point in the diet cycle where you get those intense food cravings and it feels harder and harder to stick to your eating plan, leading you to break the diet, feel out of control, eat all the things that have been off limits, and then blame yourself. So that is the biological mechanisms at play here. But then there's also the psychological factor here. It is a human condition. You want what you can't have. I'm thinking right now of my nieces and nephews, and when they're all playing together, if I tell one of them that there is one toy they're not allowed to play with that is for the other kids, even if that toy is an empty shoebox, they will fixate on that toy, even if it's something that they didn't necessarily want to play with. Because they've been told that they can't have it, they will fixate on that toy, and it is the only thing that they're going to want to play with. The same way that when you go camping, for example, and you go without a shower for 7 days, all you can think about is wanting to have a nice warm shower and be clean. On a day-to-day basis, though, when you're showering every day and you know that you can have access to a shower every day, you're not craving it, right? You're not getting home at the end of the day thinking, God, I've just been thinking about showering all day, because you know that you can have it. But when it comes to food, when you are restricting certain foods, of course, if you're restricting carbs, you're going to start thinking about carbs. I've worked with some ex-Optavia members. Optavia is this plan that gives you like pre-portioned meals and bars, and it tells you that you can't eat fruit because it's too high in sugar. And intuitively, we all know that fruit is super good for you, full of nutrients, full of fiber. And what I've heard from most people who have done this is that feeling of all I've wanted was fruit. All I could think about was being able to eat fruit, but I can't. And so on a psychological element, if you are constantly restricting and telling yourself that you can't have certain foods, or you're having those foods but feeling badly about it, you're going to trigger that loss of control eating, because you're telling yourself, I'm having this food now. I know that I shouldn't be doing this, so I'm going to eat as much as I can, and then I won't have it for another week or 2 weeks or month or whatever it is. And you might not be doing this consciously. You might not be aware that you're doing this. Your diet brain has that ingrained in you. And so this happens on a subconscious level. And this is what we do in the program, is we dive into your subconscious, because a lot of people feel like they know what they should be doing, but they're not doing it. And it's because you might understand on a logical level what's going on. But if on a subconscious, you've ingrained these mindsets and these behaviors, it's not as easy as following a meal plan or counting your calories. It needs to be addressed on a mindset internal level. But I also want to be clear that this isn't your fault. It is not your fault that you are stuck in this cycle, that you've repeated the same pattern maybe for a year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, however long it's been. It's the fault of the diet industry, the diet itself, the restriction, and the deprivation. Your biological system makes it nearly impossible to eat less than you need, willpower or not. Your psychological system is wired to obsess over the things that it can't have, willpower or not. So now you are faced with a decision, right? Knowing what you know now, we're going into the new year. And you know what that means? The new year, new me diet talk. No matter if you're setting an official New Year's resolution or not, you might know in the back of your mind, you're already planning some kind of reset once January hits. The vow to get quote unquote healthier, which usually goes hand in hand with the vow to start cutting back on certain foods and to lose weight. And the end of the year for you has probably coincided with stage 1, which is the gaining control of your weight for the past few years. The dissatisfaction with your body and the disappointment in where your health has gone. And you might be vowing to rein in some control over your eating. But given what you know now about the diet cycle, you have 2 options. Option 1, you can repeat the diet cycle again. Any plan that starts with restriction is bound to repeat this pattern time and time again. Because if restriction is what triggers it, it absolutely cannot be the solution. Think of it this way. I want you to count how many times you've tried a diet or had a weight loss attempt. Maybe it was 2, 5, 20, or so many times you can't even count. Now, imagine you had this best friend who was in an extremely toxic relationship and they would get together, break up, get together, break up, time and time again. And every breakup was really messy. And she came out of that breakup feeling emotionally drained, low self-esteem, low confidence. And imagine they have done that as many times. I mean, they've broken up and gone back together as many times as you tried different diets and weight loss attempts. And in the new year, they've been broken up. And in the new year, she came to you and said, you know what? We're going to give this one more try, right? It's been 12 times now that we've tried it, gone back together, broken up. The relationship is always very tumultuous, but we're going to give this one more try. I think this time is going to be different. What would you say to that friend? Probably somewhere along the lines of, this is not the right relationship for you. And it's time to leave that in the past. It's time to move on. As hard as it is, as much as you are familiar with this relationship, because we get really familiar with dieting, right? As much as we know what's going to happen, we know that it's not going to work. We know it's going to repeat the same patterns. We get familiar with it. We get comfortable. It's what we know. But you also have option number 2, which is to right now make the firm decision to not repeat this cycle ever again, to not go back to this toxic relationship, which has led you to where you are at today. And to do that, the way out is to stop trying to control your eating through external means like restrictions and food rules and dieting, and to finally turn internally by addressing and changing your mindset around food, changing the way that you relate and think about food, addressing the root cause of the food issues that worry you right now, like binging and emotional eating, and to learn to listen to your body instead of constantly listening to other people telling you how to eat. Intuitive eating is the key to breaking this never-ending diet cycle by giving you an entirely new way of relating to food that is relaxed and peaceful and not rooted in restriction, but in trust instead. Remember, your body is on your side. Diet culture is not. Instead of constantly yo-yoing from one extreme to another and spending another year obsessed with food, when you remove the initial stage of this cycle, which is the restriction that leads you to rebound to the other side of binging, you'll finally be able to settle in that middle where eating is balanced and consistent and easy. It's in the middle that there's this space to discover what it looks like to fuel your body adequately with a mix of pleasurable foods that make you feel good. And when you do this, you can move out of this feast or famine mode and you can break free from this diet cycle. So if you are ready to leave dieting behind in 2022 and step into an entirely new relationship with food, with your body, with yourself in 2023, and you want to learn how to become an intuitive eater, but you have no idea where to start, then I have something for you. I have a brand new 7-day intuitive eating challenge that I will be hosting starting January 5th. This is where I'm going to take you through the initial steps that you need to get started on your intuitive eating and healing journey. This challenge is going to be absolutely free. So to sign up, to save your spot, you can head over to the show notes wherever you listen to your podcast and find the link there, sabrinamangao.com/challenge. And if you can't find the show notes, then go to that URL and you'll be able to sign up there. So thank you so much for listening to today's episode. I hope that you got a lot of value from it. Of course, if you did, share it with someone that you know could benefit from it. Thank you so much for listening, downloading the podcast every single week. I am absolutely loving all the messages that I get about the things that you're learning. So keep sending them my way. I appreciate you so much. Happy holidays. Remember to enjoy the foods that you truly want to eat without guilt, without shame, and try to stay away from that Aunt Karen who's trying to convince you to go on Weight Watchers in the new year. Hold your boundaries, hold your ground, trust yourself, and I will see you next week. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you found it valuable, I would love if you would share it with someone you know that could benefit. If you're loving the show, don't forget to subscribe over on Apple Podcasts so you don't miss a single episode. I really love hearing feedback from you, so please leave a rating and review over on Apple to help us get in the ears of more people who need it the most. Finally, come hang out with me on Instagram at Sabrina Magna Health for more educational content and get up close and personal with me. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you on the next episode.